This video is brought to you by Miniature Market. Thousands of board games, discounted prices, miniaturemarket.com.
Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today it's all about the robots and the conveyor belts and checkered flags and weapons and lasers, because today we're going to be talking about the new version of Robo Rally. This one is 2 to 6 players, just was reprinted and republished by Hasbro, and they've done quite a few things. Now this review is going to be only about this game, not the previous version of this game, so I'm going to kind of show you how the game works and then show you my final thoughts on the other side. Here's the insert for the new Robo Rally. You have the different players' cards here. You have the new painted robots here. Cards, flags, tokens, energy, things like that in the insert. And below the insert, you have the rules. You have all of the player boards, which we'll get to in just a moment. They have different robots on them, and all of the different boards that are in the game. At the beginning of the game, you're going to pick one of these cool robots to be yours for the game, and you'll be able to take its player mat as well. And for each of those robots, you have a player mat that you'll be using, and it has a little backstory for each of the guys. When you flip it over, it basically has your thing. Now, these are not thick mats. These are basically paper, almost like thick cardstock, but not very thick. Now, there's 19 different configurations in the rules to set up different games. All these boards are double-sided. Sometimes you'll use just one big board. Sometimes you'll use many of them, up to 4 or even 5 of them. For shorter or longer games, and you can also mix them up and make your own boards, but there's 19 different ways. This is one of the beginner maps. What you're trying to do is get to the 3 checkpoints. 1, 2, and 3. The first one to do that is going to win the game. Now the youngest player will put their robot on one of these empty gear spots, and then everyone else clockwise will do so. And then the person closest to this antenna will get to go first, and so on and so forth for this round. Let's go through the flow of the game. Here's my player mat. Everyone gets one big pile of cards that are specific to their color. They get 5 energy cubes. And the first thing we do is we can upgrade and buy some things. Then we'll be programming all of our cards, and then we'll activate all of our cards. So let's talk about the upgrade phase. Now upgrade starts with priority. Priority is the closest one to this antenna. So this is the closest, then this is second, third, fourth. You just count the spaces away from the antenna, that's priority. Now there'll be one card face up for every player in the game, and each person going to that priority can spend some of their energy to buy some of these cards, which gives them special abilities. Like some of them cost 3, maybe 1, some of them are free. The red ones are temporary, the yellow ones are permanent, and in that order you would buy these cards. And again, they just allow you to break the rules of the game. This one will just give you some extra energy. This one will allow you to, pay an energy to go through obstacles, and they just do different things that break the rules of the game. They give you sort of power-ups. And when you do install those upgrades, they go right here. You can have 3 of each type, permanent and temporary. Then we go to the programming phase, which happens simultaneously. Everybody will draw 9 cards off of their deck, and they would usually be in their hands, but I've got them face up just to show you. And they're going to select 5 of them, and they're going to place these in their 5 registers face down in order that they want to program them in. So if this was my robot here, there's a wall here, so I would want to kind of go here, then turn left, and go up here, maybe get on the conveyor belt and come down here, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to try to program myself around that. And after I've programmed my 5 cards, I'd take the ones that I didn't. Of course, these would have been in my hand, and I'll put them in my discard pile. By the way, if you're drawing cards and you don't have 9, you would shuffle this discard pile, make a new draw pile to make sure you have 9, to then select 5, discarding the ones that you didn't want. Everybody's doing this simultaneously. Then from that priority order, meaning the closest to the antenna, we would all then activate. So everyone would activate this in priority order. So I'm actually closest, so I would get to move 1 forward. So I actually, boom, move 1 forward. This player would have gone next, and let's say they just did turn right. Let's say this player had moved forward, and let's say this player had moved forward. Once everybody has done 1 card in their register, we then activate the things on the board. So some boards have different things like lasers that will shoot. Here's a board that if it was here, these lasers right up here would kind of shoot and hurt robots and stuff, only if you're ending your turn there. But since, and conveyor belts would move, so if there were robots on a conveyor belt, it would actually move in the direction, keep in the same way it was facing. But in this case, nobody did anything with the board, and now the robots would fire their lasers forward. This fires nowhere. This one fires here and hits this first robot. They don't go through the robot, they just hit the first one. So whoever controls this has to take a damage. Now when they take a damage, they take a spam card and they will place it in their discard pile. So next time it cycles through, when they pull their 9 cards, one of them is going to be a spam card, which basically says play on the card on top of your programming deck for this register. So this does a few things. Number one, it clogs up your hand, meaning you're going to have more cards in your deck and they're going to start being very bad. Now, granted, if you have 9 cards and you just have like 1 damage, well, you don't have to choose that, but your choices become more limited because you're picking 5 out of 9, and if 4 of those are damaged, well, then I have to play the 5 that aren't damaged. But over the course of the game, you're going to be getting more damage. You're going to have to end up playing it. And let's say I had played this here. When I flipped it, I would have to discard this out, and then I would take the random card off the top and place it here, sort of like a glitch, and I would do something that my robot didn't know was really going to happen. And that's how damage works in this game. Now, once this spam pile completely runs out, you're forced to take one of these other ones. The worms allows you to makes you immediately reboot, which we'll talk about later. Viruses allows you to give a spam card to anyone that's 6 spaces away from you. Trojan horse makes you immediately take 2 spam. So these are worse. This one's actually not bad, but you'd have to take one of these other ones. So we had just finished the first register, then we'd start with the second one. Again, each of these registered, we would look to see who has priority if we think it could possibly bump into each other and things like that. And I would do my thing, everybody would do their thing in priority order if they think they're going to bump into each other. Otherwise, you can do it simultaneously if you don't think you're going to bump into anybody. And then you would do the board. And then it's play and do the board actions and the robot lasers. And you play and you do your things and you do the board and the lasers from the robots and so on and so forth till all 5 are done. Now, just speeding through some of the movements that I did, I had turned left and I moved 2, but since this was a wall, it just hit there and stayed. That's good because then I turned right and then I moved 2 and I started to move up towards I was trying to get to the conveyor belt. I didn't quite make it. I did pretty good for my first turn, but these players all had the same idea. They were trying to go the same way and they ended up hitting each other, shooting each other, taking lots of damage and not going very far. Now, some of these places start with energy. If you end up on here, you get an energy as we saw earlier. It helps you buy cards. Also, if in the 5th register, the last turn of a round, you end here, you can always take one of these from the bank and get energy that way. Now, of course, the object is to get through here and to get to these things here. So let's say I got into this checkpoint. I would then get a checkpoint token and put it here so I can see how many I've been to. These are also very thin, flimsy type of things. Also, the cards themselves are small and they are very thin and flimsy. Both the small cards and these bigger cards here, they are not very thick at all. They bend very easily and they're not good quality. So at the end of that round, you'd take all these cards, you'd discard them, and you'd start over. By the way, there is a timer in the game. When the first person puts gets all 5 cards programmed, they'd flip this timer, and that just means everybody else has to finish before this. If they don't, then the ones that aren't basically get discarded, and they would get randomly filled from their draw deck. Now, if your robot dies, just falls off the edge or goes into a pit, essentially you have to reboot. You would have to take 2 of these spam cards that we talked about. You'd put it in your discard pile. You'd cancel and put everything that you had programmed that round into your discard pile. Then you'd go to one of the respawning spots. It actually has an arrow compared to, there'll be 1 or more of these in each scenario depending on it. And you would end up rebooting right there. There's also 6 special cards that are out at the beginning of the game. And there's different temporary upgrade cards that you can buy from the shop that I showed you earlier that helps you activate some of these. You'd put them in your discard pile, but they would cycle through and you'd get to use them. Like a move 3, take an energy cube, and different things that you can specialize. Do the sandbox routine, move 1, 2, or 3, back up, turn left, turn right, U-turn, that type of thing. So these are special cards that you can get at some points in the game. And as I mentioned, there's tons of racing courses for starters, beginners, intermediate, and advanced, and it tells you how to set up the scenario. And you can see some of them are really long with 4 boards, lots of pits, all sorts of conveyor belts, and things like that. Alright, so this is the review about the new version. I'm not going to compare and contrast this with the older version. In this video, I made a specific video that does that in great detail of a comparison, this version versus the first version. Click the link in the video description below to get to that video. Now, just about this game standing on its own, what did I think about it? Well, let's talk about the components first. You know, the boards, they're thick and they're nice. They're 10 by 10s. And the figures themselves, the actual robots, I like that they were painted. They did look cool. And I like the way that the box was that you could look through and see all those little minis there. They are plastic, they are light, but they do look nice. From that standpoint, I like those aspects of the components. A lot of the cards I did not like. You could probably see that in the overview. They're very thin, very cheap, cards there. They bend very easily. They don't stay form. I wish the little programming cards would have been a little bit bigger. Shuffling that small deck is a pain in the butt. I do wish that those shop cards are a little bit easier to read, maybe like sort of like the King of Tokyo cards where the text is a little bit bigger. It's kind of hard. You got to kind of look at a bunch of them on the table. From a component standpoint, some of the things I liked, a lot, the cubes felt and looked very cheap, and the cards were very bad. So from a component standpoint, some good, some not so good. Overall, probably below average. Now the gameplay itself. Now Robo Rally's always been one of those games that's sort of a crazy experience. You're programming, crazy things are happening, and that's what this game is. If you like the programming aspect of games, this one has held dear to a lot of people's hearts. Me, I haven't never been a huge fan of Robo Rally. I think there's other programming games out there that are much better, but they have changed a lot of the mechanisms and things that drive this game, this new version. It almost was a different game completely, but now it was just a new version of this game that they've streamlined a lot of things. So again, I'm not going to compare and contrast all the old and new, but I think this version of Robo Rally is better than the older versions. I think the changes that they've made with the individual decks and the way that you don't have no player elimination and no having to skip turns to get rid of damage. I think a lot of the things are really clever. I kind of felt they brought some modern mechanisms here, sort of that deck building element where you're possibly buying some new cool cards and putting them in your deck, or when you're hitting stuff, you're putting those damages in your deck and you're trying to work your way around them or be able to play them and get rid of them. And I thought that mechanism was really cool. And when you play the damage, yeah, you're going to take a random card, but then you get to get rid of that damage. And I thought that was a really cool way of managing this. So I really liked that aspect of the game. It's probably the thing I liked the most about this version of the game was that deck building aspect and hand management and getting rid of the damage that way. So I mean, it was fine. It's a good version. It's a better version. It's probably the best version that's out, I would say, from a mechanical standpoint, the way they streamlined a lot of things. But it's still Robo Rally. And, everyone's gonna say, well, which version do I want? We'll see that other video for that. But for this, yes, it's an improved version, but it still, to me, it still does feel aged. It still does feel like there's so many games that have come out recently, even very recently this past year. Mechs vs. Minions was a programming game with robots, mechs. But they had all these cool cards of Omni Stomp where you can move to the side or different ways and all these different ways to move, and it just flowed well. Yes, it's a completely different type of game, co-op versus competitive, but the program aspect is exactly pretty much the same of how it works, but it's done in a much more streamlined, a manner that just feels more modern. This still does feel aged. And the games can still go very long. Now, in this book, they had the different short, medium, and hard and courses. Even the last beginner one in this book, that is supposed to be a quote-unquote medium game, took us close to 2 hours to finish. And that's just too long for a game like this that's put out by a mass market company like Hasbro. I really thought they were going to streamline the maps to make them even shorter. And that one was even pretty... it's not very forgiving. So it was a tough map, but it was in the beginner section. And we played Robo Rally before, but we had some experiences with this that in the end, it's still Robo Rally. Some games might go over well, but some of them might just drag on forever, and some of them might not go over well, where people are getting frustrated with falling off the thing and starting over. But a bunch of people falling off or falling into pits in the same turn, and then all of them have to go back to the same spot. No matter what flag they're on in this version, you go back to the same spot, pushing people, and then the whole priority thing starts and everyone's just pushing each other off to the side again. There's just some problems I had with the mechanisms of the game or the way things work. I will also say the shop here buying the cards, it was interesting. I like how it kind of felt like King of Tokyo in that regard, but I also know after reading the designer Richard Garfield's notes online about what he changed and what he actually submitted to his rules, his version was different what was finally here. In this version, you're getting cards, you're buying cards for a specific amount. There's an amount of cards out there for however many players, and everyone's looking at those cards, and that's a cool thing. But with with a good amount of players, everyone's going to want to read those cards. You got to figure out who wants to buy first with priority. It really bogged the game down. But Richard's whole thing was, hey, you get 3 cards to start the game. You pay 2. Or you start with 2 energy and you pay cost to activate one of those. And if you want to buy cards later, you just spend 2 energy and you get the top card. That would have much more streamlined the aspect of this, kept it from bogging down a lot. I don't know why a publisher would take rules finally submitted by someone as big as Richard Garfield and not put them in the game. Are you kidding? Not only not put them in, but change them for the worse. So, a lot of things were done to make this game pretty good, but a lot of things were not quite all the way, and it's still Robo Rally. It still can go over pretty badly sometimes, and it still lasts way too long for most of the maps, and that's Robo Rally.
This video was sponsored by Miniature Market's Review Corner. The Review Corner features podcasts, video, and written game reviews by gamers for gamers. Miniature Market, the online gaming superstore. Thousands of board games, discounted prices. Check them out at miniaturemarket.com. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for backing me on Kickstarter, making this season become a reality. I'd like to especially thank those here that have backed me at the credit level. Now, these video reviews are also available by audio on our podcast. It's the intros and the final thoughts on GameBoyGeek.com. Click podcast.